Hi guys, my name is Brady Bissett. I'm a cinematographer and DP. I hope you learned something from this video. In this tutorial, we're going to break down this moonlit television living room scene so you can make your night scenes look absolutely perfect. So for gear, I personally am using the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, and for lighting I'm going to be using two Aperture 300Ds and one Aperture 120D Mark II. Although it's okay if you don't have the specific gear that I have, like I've said in the past, you can definitely use work lights, LED lights, any lights that you have laying around at home. And as long as you just follow the steps that we've got going on here, you'll still get an excellent product out of this breakdown. So don't worry, don't be stressed. Everything is possible on a very low budget DIY basis. So let's get going. Before you start lighting or even think about starting to light, you really need to make sure that you lock in your scene and dress the scene to look exactly how you want it to look. So that's what we did here. It is very important to showcase the mood and the story, not only just through the lighting, but through the scene that you have. That's why we put so much focus on making sure that everything looked perfect before we even dove into any of the lighting. So the first light that we have is actually a pre-existing light, being that side lamp. And that side lamp acts as our practical. For those not familiar with the term practical light, it's any light that you have in frame or on set visible in the shot that really adds to the story or adds to the mood. Usually things like candles, television, side lamps, street lights, things like that make excellent practical lights. But although they're excellent practical lights, they don't necessarily output either great power or a very soft, pleasing light. So this motivates the need for additional lighting. So motivated lighting is used to imitate a natural light, practical light, or any other light source that is used in the shot. For example, this lamp. We added motivated lighting to make sure that the scene looked cinematically pleasing while making sure that the lighting looked as if it were actually coming from that lamp, our practical in this case. So here's our example. Looking at our subject Sarah sitting on the couch, with just our practical light on there, you see that it casts a lot of really harsh, ugly shadows on the side of her face, and it also doesn't actually output a great deal of brightness. So this issue that we're running into motivates our second light. So the second light that we're going to learn about is something called a book light. But don't stress if you don't know what that means. We're going to learn about that in a second, so just hold tight. But before we dive into that, since the floor light is motivated by this book light, it would look very weird if the floor light was actually very warm color temperature and the light that we add in is very cool white temperature like this. So some lights come with the ability to have bicolor, which gives you the option to move from a very cool color temperature all the way up to warm color temperature. And other lights come with an RGB option, meaning red, green, blue, making it easy to pick any color that you want in the color spectrum. In this case, the light that I was using, the 300D Mark II, does not have either of those. So what I did here is take some of my Roscoe color gels and found a gel that looked very similar to the output of that floor lamp, and I clamped that right to the front of my light that I was using. And remember, if you don't have a 300D like the light I'm using, you can use work lamps and stuff like that, and a lot of those halogen work lamps actually output a warm color temperature very similar to the floor lamp. So let's talk diffusion. If I took that light and just shined it directly at our subject, it's going to cast a lot of really ugly, unpleasing shadows across her face, and that's something that we don't want. So a book light is used very commonly to achieve very, very soft lighting, especially across faces and skin tones. So to make a book light, let's break that down for you. So to do so, we're going to take the light source and we're actually going to bounce it away from the set, and we're going to be bouncing it off a reflector disc or something white with a reflective material. So once bouncing off of that reflector, it's going to be going through a very thin layer of diffusion and then traveling over to our subject. So this way the light has a very, very soft roll off from the highlight side of her face all the way over to her shadows, and it doesn't look very drastic and contrasty. But don't worry, if you don't have these materials or even the space to do this, that's completely okay. You can always just punch light directly through one layer of diffusion to still get a very, very soft light across your subject. Even things like white bed sheets and white t-shirts act as great diffusion. So again, if you don't have any resources, those work excellent to diffuse the light and make it extra soft on your subject. So looking at the scene, everything now looks really, really fantastic just with the one book light that we have in place here. But I did notice things that weren't necessarily natural that I wanted to cover and take care of. For starters, I added a black cloth clamped to the scrim that I had there because I saw some light spilling on the table, that living room table, that didn't look like it was naturally coming from that moody side light that we have placed there. So by adding that in, it just cut out some of the weird unnatural brightness. And then the same thing applied for some light that had been spilling on the back wall as well behind our subject. I added just one of those 5-in-1 discs, or you can use a black sheet, black cloth, anything like that, and clamped it just to make sure none of the light spilled backwards onto the wall, and just adding one more step towards making sure that it looked like that light was coming from the side light that we had. So now I feel this looks absolutely perfect, and we can go on to the next light, our third light. So to add to the feeling of night and adding depth to our image, because depth in the frame is just very, very important, can't stress that enough, we're gonna add in a fake moon. And to do that, I took my Aperture 300D, mounted it on a C-stand outdoors through the window, and kind of put it in an ideal position that the moon would be coming from. So this serves a few different purposes. So the main purpose is it being motivated by the moon. Again, we're touching on motivated lighting. The moon isn't bright enough and it's never actually in the ideal perfect position to be shining in at this angle. So the moon motivates us adding in this light. So to make it feel cool and moon-like, I took another one of my Roscoe gels, and in this case a light blue one, and I clamped it to the front just to add to those cool tones and make sure that it's looking accurate coming through the window. And also another cool tip, that this adds a lot of color contrast, contrasting from the warm tones that we have indoors, and then in turn being very blue and cool, and on the other side of the spectrum, outdoors coming in. So it adds, I guess, some evenness to our frame. So killing two birds with one stone, this light also acts as a rim light, and a rim light in turn, the main purpose is to pull the subject away from the shadows and away from the background by kind of edging their shoulder and edging their hair and adding a little bit of glow, separating the background and our middle ground, this being our subject. And the last reason for adding this light is that it adds this ambient blue glow that keeps the viewer's eye from going from the foreground into the middle ground and then to the background, seeing that blue glow on the windowsill, and then keeping the imagination going outdoors and beyond rather than being stagnant in this scene. Now, a cool pro tip to make everything feel a little bit more natural, because that's the goal, is for artificial light to feel real. I took a branch off of a tree and I mounted that to a C-stand that I actually placed in front of the window, so when the light passed through it, it added a little bit of shadow and texture, like there was a tree outside of the window that the moon was passing through, casting those shadows right on that windowsill that you see there. Now, this definitely isn't anything that's necessary, but it just adds one more pop of character, and that's just something that I always try to do in every frame, is add a little bit more realism like this tree. Our last light is a super fun one, and I think even my favorite. So this is going to be another motivated light source imitating a television that is not actually in the frame. We had no TV on set here. The purpose of doing this is just to add to this story of Sarah, our wonderful talent, sitting there watching TV in the moonlight in our cozy little living room. So I figured a TV would be an excellent touch to the room. So here's how we did it. So in my case, I used an Aperture 120D because it just so conveniently has a television setting that fluctuates the power output to make it look like our viewers watching television. And by doing so, I put that in a softbox with the grid on the softbox, so it diffuses it, and then the grid acts as directing it and making sure that it doesn't spill outwards in the frame, and it just keeps everything going straight in one direction on the subject. So make sure whenever you're directing light, you want to diffuse it first, and then you're going to direct it by putting the grid on top of that. So not all of you have a 120D or a light similar to this. There's other alternatives that you can use that can still get you a great final product. You can take a light, turn it the other way, and bounce it off of a silver reflector or even tin foil if you don't have that, and just kind of move your hands around like I did here, which will redirect the light in different places, kind of fluctuating the light on the subject's face, making it again look like they're watching TV. I think my favorite part about this is that we actually didn't have any TV on set, or I don't even think in the facility that we were at, and we had faked it just by using lighting. So it's a really fun touch to add and a really creative thing that you can add to your projects as well. So like I said in my last video, I of course added Haze. Haze does a great job of adding character, adding a little bit of atmosphere, and then of course accenting the light as it comes through. Light beams, hard light does a great job cutting through the haze and showing those lines and adding a little bit more character to your film. So let's go ahead and take a look at the lights that we added one by one. I think that everything looks absolutely beautiful with them, but we're gonna do one more thing here. And what that thing is adjust the shot so I can show you how we're gonna adjust the lights accordingly. So for shot number 2, I moved into a tight handheld shot of Sarah and our wonderful model Prince. Normally he comes. So when moving the shot, the booklight that I had initially placed left Sarah's camera side of her face in a lot of shadows. So I adjusted it and moved it over a little bit towards my side of the camera, and then moved it in a little bit more as well. But when I moved it in, since the light source was closer to her face, I had to turn down the brightness a little bit. And the purpose of moving it the way that I did was just to wrap the highlights around her face a little bit more, and again add to that clean roll off. And I had done the same thing for the television as well, or our 120D in this case. I moved it in just a little bit to make sure that I was blasting onto her face, but then since we got closer, I brought the exposure down, or the brightness down of that light, because it was a little bit hot and it was distracting and taking away from the moonlight that we had, as well as our warm side light. So it's very important to remember that you certainly are allowed to move lights as you adjust the shots. A lot of people kind of get themselves in a rut that when they adjust the shot, the light doesn't look as nice as it did before. So it's very important to move the lights and adjust them accordingly, although keeping a mental note of continuing that consistency and making sure that obviously you wouldn't move the complete direction of a light. You're keeping it coming from the right direction, just kind of altering where it's coming from so it looks a lot more pleasing at the end. So that about wraps everything up with the lighting on both shots. So let's take a look at the progression of each light that we added in our second shot, and then take a look of our final product. There you have it. That's how you make a moonlit scene using both motivated and practical lighting. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Go ahead and connect with me on Instagram and YouTube for many more videos and breakdowns like this.